Jesus was killed because people didn't like what he was saying, so could you call him the first celebrity victim of cancel culture? It's hard to believe I'm walking through the ruins of the first ever city, because I'm not. So there hasn't been like a cave wall that's been like, oh my God, that's an incredible story. We need to get Steven Spielberg to make this.
Someone came up with the idea of also eating plants, which were easier to catch because they couldn't run away.
Why do they say it's a mystery how the pyramids were built when it's obviously just big bricks in a triangle?
There was a white man that sang music of black origin.
Did he have to apologise on social media?
No, because there was no social media then.
Why doesn't Elvis apologise now?
Because Elvis is dead.
So he's appropriated dead people's lifestyles now? What a fucking thief. Wheels might look complicated to the likes of you, but the way they work is actually simple. Ancient people invented currency to make life on Earth easier, but in doing so, they inadvertently invented capitalism, which is going to kill everyone. Sorry, that's not a question, it's just something I read on Twitter. They all agree you preach tolerance and forgiveness, a message so important his most ardent followers would eventually start killing anyone who didn't want to hear it. Early man domesticated dogs for companionship, and cats for whatever we have cats for, emoji, or as the ancient Egyptians who invented them called them, hieroglyphics. If someone shouted this aloud, would that have been the first audiobook?
No.
The Egyptians believed the most significant thing you could do in your life was die.
You lay it out on a table, and then you wash it, and then you start by removing the brain, and then they would cut open down the middle of the body, and they would take out anything that they thought would rot. And then they would cover it in salt and dry it out, and then they would wrap it in bandages, and then that would be a mummy.
So the kind of spa treatment that Gwyneth Paltrow has on a weekly basis. But it was so long ago. Why should I care? Why are pyramids that shape? Is it to stop homeless people sleeping on them? With all that wriggling about, they'd have seen right up their bumholes and everything. Couldn't they censor it for people watching it in the auditorium? Modesty patches or something?
A philosopher might argue that that time they've wasted never existed in the first place. At which point you'd probably give up talking to them and open a packet of biscuits.
When Christ was born, he had a magic flaming circle on his head, which would have set fire to all the hair and pubes as he came out. What's ironic about Jesus Christ becoming a carpenter was he was actually named after the two words you're most likely to shout after hitting your thumb with a hammer. Imagine if every day your lunch was just screaming and wouldn't stop. That's going to have an impact on your mental health.
Mental Health Alliance.
Yeah. The grim period that followed became known as the Dark Ages. Ouch! Spoke to Jesus and said, I promise if I survive this, I'll believe in you. And he did survive, but he fractured his skull and broke both his legs. Why did Jesus do that to him?
Instant or unchanging. One day unexpectedly changed to Christianity.
See, Paul never forgave him. He said, if I ever see Christ again, he's a dead man.
Right.
Rome had been sacked, destroyed, properly fucked to bits.
Well, it has very negative connotations of being a dark and ignorant and benighted time, and
Which it was. You know that sort of...
Yeah.
8 million pints.
Yes.
And of course they didn't have blood banks back then, did they? What a waste. Look at the todger. You can't say that's beautiful. What was Rene sauce? Was that a sort of 16th century ketchup?
You'd be quite upset, just as Oedipus was.
Maybe I'm cold, but I just don't give a shit about people in ancient Greece.
Like all women, you simply can't tell what's going on in her head.
Which was more culturally significant, the Renaissance or Single Ladies by Beyoncé? Hang on, if I think therefore I am, what about other people? Do they think therefore they am? How can I tell if they're thinking therefore they am? Or am I just thinking they think therefore they am, but actually they're not real and I'm only thinking they am? Are you thinking therefore you am right now?
Some Native Americans taught them how to grow corn and where to fish. In exchange, the colonists introduced the Native Americans to smallpox.
Galileo's full name was Galileo Figaro Magnifico, wasn't it?
I'm not sure that's right. I don't know.
That's what it says in Dominican Rhapsody. Beethoven wrote that song that goes da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum. What do those lyrics mean?
Well, it's a really strong orchestral motif.
It's just the word dumb over and over again. Is it a dig at his audience, or is it German for something?
Enlightenment philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. A name so French, you might as well have been called Pierre Baguette, but wasn't, which is why I didn't call him that.
Many of these colonists quickly discovered they couldn't be arsed, so they stole people from Africa and made them do it instead. Do you think billionaires like Elon Musk should be worried about getting guillotined?
The settlers never forgot what the Native Americans had done for them, although they did ignore it when they massacred them years later.
Is it possible to think you're someone else? Like, if I thought really hard that I was Eddie Murphy, could I eventually become him? If you haven't heard of air, it's an invisible blend of gases so addictive we suffer fatal withdrawal symptoms within minutes of our supply being cut off.
Would getting shot in the eye actually hurt? Because it's just a sort of water bag, isn't it, your eye? I bet it'd just pop and sting a bit, but you'd basically be able to go about your business.
It would be hard to come up with a brand name for human flesh, wouldn't it? Horf?
They do have the right to own weapons.
They have the right to bear arms.
Correct.
But bears don't have arms.
They do, actually.
Oh, do they?
America became known as the land of the free, which must have come as a surprise to all the slaves.
Abraham Lincoln was shot in the theatre box, wasn't he? Where is that on the body? And why was he shot? Was it because he wouldn't take his hat off? Because that's quite annoying in the theatre, isn't it, when someone's in front of you with a hat on?
At long last, slavery was abolished and replaced with simple racial prejudice.
So we had daylight during the day and we had candles at night.
Yes.
So we didn't need light bulbs. His life's work was meaningless. You have to play classical music on an orchestra. How do you play an orchestra? Do you blow into it, or is it one of those ones where you rub a stick on the strings? I think they run on belief. It's just because we believe planes can fly that they do. So the media has to keep up the pretense, or they're just going to start dropping out of the sky. Same with Wi-Fi. There's no way that's real. We just have to go along with this pantomime or everything grinds to a halt. It's not fair, is it, when a male scientist like Bruce Banner gets exposed to gamma radiation, he gets to be like a superhero, doesn't he? He gets his own comic book and movie franchise. Marie Curie just gets killed.
I'm afraid that nuclear war and the threat of nuclear destruction remains very much with us.
So how far was the first flight?
Well, on that day when the Wright brothers carried out several flights, they were typically of the order of just a few hundred feet.
Right, well, we could have walked that.
Well, they could, but that wasn't the point.
Leica unfortunately never made it back to Earth because shortly after launching, she overheated and she tragically passed away just a few hours after being launched.
You're fucking joking! People were prudish back then, weren't they? If they saw his penis, they'd probably have a stroke, wouldn't they?
Probably. I don't think that would have made it onto the meeting. Oh, God.
That's not a joke. What's funny about that? If they saw his penis, they'd have a stroke. That's no laughing matter. We're talking about people's lives here.
Russia changed its name to USA, or sometimes.
What was the Soviet onion?
Well, I think you're labouring under a misapprehension, and you probably mean the Soviet Union.
No, it's onion. I saw it on a bit of paper earlier.
Well, that's probably been misspelt, or you can't read very well. But I think that you mean, in historical terms, the Soviet Union, or the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
I don't want to be rude, but I think you're mansplaining a bit.
One man who thought it was ein Load of Scheiße was German thinker Karl Marx. It's hard to tell, but if you look closely at this photograph, you might notice he had a beard.
It's ironic that he was so concerned about Cuban missiles when it was a gun in Texas he should have been worried about. I bet he was kicking himself after he was shot.
The rivalry became known as the space race because that rhymes, although probably not in Russian. We don't know what they called it, and to be honest, we probably should have found out before recording this bit.
Is that Russian for spunk?
No, it's Russian for traveller.
I suppose spunk in orbit would just sort of float around in globules, like it does in a bath. Was the 1950s real?
Yes.
It's a dead dog in space. So there's a dead dog somewhere in the back of a frame of every film shot in space, like Star Wars.
I wouldn't say...
There are dead dogs in Star Wars. That is unacceptable.
Well, Leica's satellite eventually burned up in the Earth's atmosphere, but this was well after she'd passed away. As I say, it was just a few hours after launch that she died
Sorry,
of
can we
complete
just
stress.
have a minute's silence for Leica? Okay. There's a dead dog in space.